Hello and welcome to another video. In this one, I'll be analyzing the Lyman as well as the Kharkiv front line. So let's get started with that. Starting off around Lyman, we see that the Russian line of defense is from around Karbivka, Serechne, and this area to the west, as well as connecting with Lyman. And then they have a second line of defense around Kremina and this highway that goes to the north. So with these two main defensive lines, they also have a third one, which is here at the center around Makivka, Nevsky, and so on, towards the south and Torske. Which is most likely why the Ukrainians are not attempting yet to conduct an offensive here from the south towards Yampil and cutting off Lyman from Kremina, because there are Russian forces defending this area and need to focus a lot of forces in this area to have a successful counteroffensive. However, they are focusing their forces in the north with this pincer maneuver. So what we're seeing is that the Ukrainians are pushing eastwards from the west around Losove and are trying to outflank the Russian defenses. So what we're seeing right now is that the Ukrainians are trying to take control of these villages here by their offensive direction, after which they will continue pushing eastwards to the second line of defense and finally the third one around the Kremina line. So they're going straight ahead towards the highway to cut off the highway, but also it is meant to be connected with a offensive from the south, which is why I believe that the Ukrainians are trying to conduct a river crossing here from the south, either towards Dniprova to attack Kremina from the south, or towards Serikne to cut off Lyman directly from Russian forces in the east. Now, that is on the Lyman front line. However, this isn't enough by itself. We also need to look at the northern front around Kharkiv. So looking at the north, we see that the Ukrainians are attacking from three directions: Divorikne, Kupiansk, and Seminka. And what they are trying to do here is to establish a beachhead where they take control of the eastern side of the Oskil River, which is why we see a offensive towards the north here as well, where most of this area is actually left undefended by the Russians, which means that the Ukrainians are able to push northwards very soon. After which, with a successful takeover of the eastern side of the Oskil River, they will try to push southwards towards Svatove, crossing through that and reaching Kremina in the south. So the strategy here is to achieve a beachhead, push eastwards here, and connect that push eastwards with a push towards Svatove that will go through Svatove towards Kremina, and finally a push across the rivers here in the south towards either Serikne or Kremina, to encircle all of the Russian forces here around the Lyman area. The Russians are picking up on this and are now situating their forces here around Lyman as their first line of defense, the second line of defense around Serikne, and the third line of defense around Pokrovsk to Kremina, here around the Luhansk region. So we will see the major focus of Russian forces to be around Svatove, which the Ukrainians have been shelling for a long time now, about a week or more. So they are aware of the Russian grouping here, which is supposed to go towards anywhere there's a breakthrough. So we might see the Russians relocate some forces from Svatove towards this breakthrough here in the south. However, that would leave the north vulnerable, as the Ukrainians are now pushing through to get better control over the Oskil River. This means that the Russians are now looking at two possible scenarios. One, they successfully defend and are pushed back the Ukrainians, which will allow them to relocate their forces towards the Oskil River and hold the line. Or that the Ukrainians succeed with this breakthrough, which forces the Russians to either fall back from Lyman, abandoning it, similar to what we saw around Izium, after which they will focus their defensive line around Kremina and defending the northern flank of Severodonetsk, as well as Lysychansk. However, looking at the situation right now, it seems more likely that the Russians will fail at defending Lyman and will be forced to fall back to the Kremina line. The only way I see the Russians successfully defending this area is if they receive more reinforcements as well as more equipment to the front line, which Rybar seems to report that they are. And this aligns with the fact that the Russians have mobilized their 300,000 soldiers. So depending on how long they are going to take to help out the front line, we'll see the situation changing accordingly. My theory is that the Russians actually have trained quite a few of those 300,000, probably around 50,000 before the announcement of the mobilization. I don't believe they are trying to mobilize all 300,000 at the same time. That is a logistical nightmare. However, what we have seen is that there are reports from soldiers who have participated in the Ukraine war from the Russian side. They have reported that they were sent back to Russia and they were sent as drill instructors and officers to train new soldiers. This, of course, could be limited to the Russian Third Army Corps. However, it could also mean that they had been sent back to train new recruits who have been mobilized. According to a year-old Caspian Report video, where he talks about the actual size of the Russian army, I'll put the link in the description. He also mentions that there was a source of a Russian general who said that about 300 to 700,000 Russian soldiers are able to be mobilized instantly without requiring any training because they receive that training regularly. So most likely the 300,000 who have been mobilized is included in these 300,000 who are ready to fight at any given time. However, Putin also announced that they would receive some extra training based on the special military operation, which they call the war in Ukraine, which means you'll most likely need 1 to 3 weeks to actually go through this extra training, which will allow them to be much more efficient than without their training, because this training is based on actual warfare. And they'll only be training a bunch at a time, meaning it isn't everyone at the same time. However, a large contingent of troops one at a time. So we'll see some groups of soldiers of these 300,000 mobilized receiving more training than others. However, most will be receiving training. So the situation right now is that the Russians are heavily reliant on these 300,000 mobilized troops on getting to Ukraine to reinforce their defensive lines so they aren't broken through. So we will see the Russians trying to speed up this mobilization and sending as many troops as they can as fast as possible, after which they will try to force quality over quantity by giving extra training to the soldiers that haven't been sent yet. But generally speaking, we see that the Russians are in a position where they need to send troops, but they don't want to yet. They want to give them training, which is a death sentence for the defensive lines, as they are currently being pressured heavily from both the southwest and the northwest in the Kharkiv region, as well as in the north of the Donetsk region. And they are threatening the Luhansk region from being breached by the Ukrainians from the west. So that is my take on the situation here in the north, in the Lyman/Kharkiv counteroffensive. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.